for starting the broadcast because
so you have it
failed
out
to
so
do
you
it.
can. So there's a
It's a do verify checklist.
do verify. Okay.
Actually, it's a redo because I can never figure out how to get the Google Hangouts. So I redo to get to the right spot at Google Hangouts.
And then it's a do
It's
verify.
do verify login with my right Google or Gmail user because one has access to Hangouts, the other one doesn't, which messes me up all the time. And it's a do verify for opening up the start the Google Hangout. There's a do verify this page here because there's a load piece, right?
We do anything up there?
We will be. We'll do later. There's a load piece. And then where I always mess up is to hit the start broadcast button. At the very end, it actually allows me to record this and broadcast this out on the internet. And I fail. I've done this
You start
process.
broadcast, but you don't hit record.
I hit the. I'm looking at it to make sure I got it. But yeah, I hit the Google the button that basically there's a big play button on the Google Hangout that looks like that's the start broadcast button, right? But it doesn't say start broadcast. That just gears it up so you're ready to start the broadcast. So now I got that. So it's a redo and do verify checklist, and we'll have to maintain that for the future book clubs. We're going to do that. So well, this is it. Last books, last chapters. We're going to talk about the hero, the age of checklists, and then the last few pages, which is really kind of just a story. Hey, Deborah.
No.
I wrote that.
Kind of a small little story.
Huh? No, I said I like this term.
Cool.
The transfer of experience was not hard.
So, heroes of the age checklist. Thoughts on this chapter? We're going to get through this pretty quickly, I think, since the last chapter is just pages. I want to show you guys, share it with you to wrap it up, and we'll decide the next book. Here are the age checklist. Starts out talking about the checklist was a medical device. We kind of ended last week with this. The checklist was a medical device. You'd have sales reps trying to give free lunches and steak dinners and golf trips to get people to sell it. You'd have booths at medical conventions. You'd have doctors clamoring to the CMOs to say we can't live without this device. But because it's just a checklist, nobody really is lining up for it, right? It's not that type of it's not getting that type of attention. However, when you look at other things that the industry has invested in, it highlights surgical robots, $1.7 million remote-controlled robot machines that do laparoscopic surgery that basically had minimal impact on the difference between robot-aided laparoscopic and the normal surgery for things like gallbladder removals and things of that nature. However, guy makes a checklist and he's able to have these massive impacts in terms of post-surgical infections, right? So why aren't checklists regarded as the same when it has these type of results? What's lacking in the checklist that makes people not get so excited about it as, say, a robot?
Sex appeal.
It's because it's not a robot, right? It's sex appeal, right? Yeah, what's really cool? Robots, new fancy things. What's not very cool?
Checklists are kind of old and busted.
Checklists, yeah. And he highlights this kind of near the end of the chapter. What does it take, and I'm going to jump around a lot here, what does it take to get a checklist to actually work? And he writes several pages around it.
Well, you mentioned it earlier. Maybe it's not the same. Maybe it's not the same phrase you're looking for. But at the beginning of the chapter, he's talking about checklists. And he said, just ticking boxes is not the ultimate goal here.
Yep.
Embracing a culture of teamwork and discipline is.
Right. It's that key, right? So what's a checklist? To get a checklist to work, that there's two pieces there that need to exist alongside of it. It's not just the ticking boxes. It's the teamwork and it's the
shared responsibility.
Shared responsibility, the discipline, right? The discipline is the key piece. It's that having that, establishing that discipline, establishing that practice to adhering to it, to always doing it. And why does the discipline become so hard to come by, especially when adhering to checklists? And he's got a pretty good story about it. When he starts talking about the investors, right? So if you jump into the story about, hey, where else are we seeing checklists working? He says, obviously it works. In the medical profession, we proved it in terms of reducing infections, but then he jumps into investors, right? Financial investment, venture capitalists, Warren Buffett, and he highlights three kind of high-level, multi-billion-dollar investors and how they use checklists and how they're able to do better than their counterparts that don't. And there was a piece in there that kind of stuck out at me. I wonder if anybody else saw that.
Day 3 checklist.
The day 3 checklist. Yes, I think it was that. What was the output there?
So he basically stated that they have a 3-day checklist whenever they're looking for a new major investment option or company, and so he and his team review it at the end of the 3rd day of considering an investment. By that point, the checklist says they should confirm that they have gone over the prospect's key financial statement for the previous 10 years, including checking for specific items in each statement and patterns. And then he goes on to state that part of the checklist requires the members of the team to verify they've read footnotes on the cash flow statements.
Yep.
And by doing that, they've uncovered some prospective deals that look very, very attractive, but in the end proved to be disastrous, and they passed on them.
Exactly it, right? And it's the last sentence in that paragraph right there, right? 49 times out of 50, there's nothing to be found, but then there is.
But then there is,
right?
Yep.
And checklists are boring because when you go through the checklist, 49 times out of 50, nothing's different. Just like the last time I did it, right? Last time I flew the airplane, you know how many flights happen over North America on a given day? Anybody have any idea? Thousands. How many of them fall out of the sky
Relatively
on a given
few.
day?
None.
Yeah, percentage-wise, it's kind of zero, right? That's why it's always a big deal. Now, the aviation, is disciplined towards this idea of checklists, right? The idea of a checklist not having the same type of sex appeal as, say, a robot or a new drug is because it's very routine. It requires discipline, and nothing ever changes. And so you get lulled into this false sense of security, and then people start cutting corners, and then you don't follow the checklist, and the next thing you know, you screw it up, and the next thing you know, we've got a problem because we didn't follow the checklist, right?
I think there's that added component, if I might, that generally where these are instituted, people think that their training and experience supersedes the need for a checklist.
Yeah, that's a good point too, right? And I think he mentioned that as well. I forget where he specifically wrote that.
He mentioned it right after that when he talked about surgeons.
Mm-hmm.
And he said basically when they wash their hands or talk to everyone on the team, they're improving their outcome with no increase in skill.
Yes. Yeah, that's it exactly. When surgeons make sure they wash their hands or talk to the everyone team, he's seen the surgery checklist. They improve their outcome with no increase in skill. That's what we were doing when you use a checklist. Right? So the checklist doesn't replace anybody. But especially in our business, if you kind of look at the same thing that we do, if we parallel what we do to compare it to, say, a surgeon or a pilot, it increases our likelihood of success with no increase in skill. It's the idea of the mop and the change, right? It's the idea of having a communications checklist now that we make sure we communicate it to customers at the appropriate times through the change process all the way to the end.
It's also efficiency too, right? Because he mentioned the fact that they may not be improving their skill set, but they're able to move through investments decision faster and methodically. So they don't miss anything, so there's no rework. And as a result, they're faster overall in the process.
Yep, exactly, right? So ultimately, this adherence to a discipline, this adherence to a checklist allowed them to actually move faster, became more efficient in the process. When you hear, hey, we want you guys to complete a checklist, we want you to complete a checklist, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
It's going to take longer.
Right, it's going to take longer. And he does indicate that using the checklist did increase the upfront work time, but he found we were able to evaluate many more investments in far less time overall because you had a methodical process. What was the first thing everybody thought when we came in here and started talking about change management? What do you guys think? It's going to be all longer. It's going to slow things down. What are we doing now? It feels like we're going faster now, doing more things than we were before we had change management. All right, getting things done faster. It's all just part of business. There's not a heroism aspect that needs to be there. There's not a firefighting aspect. We remove a lot of firefighting aspects from a lot of things that we do, and it's a lot more process driven. All right. Now, the interesting part is, again, nobody from a financial perspective, right? Venture capitalists, you figure that they are looking for an edge anywhere. But they get these three guys here that have established a checklist. And what was the output? What was the results that these guys were able to resolve? What just by not increasing skill, not inside information, just using an established process and a discipline to it, and never deviating from it, updating the checklist, refining the checklist, but never moving away from the process, never shortcutting the process. What were the results that these investors were able to get over top of their investors? Anybody find that? Anybody recall?
Oh, gotcha.
There's one guy.
Ask it again because I was reading ahead about Sullenberger.
One guy that was able to get 160% on average. Higher.
160%.
Yeah, guy that was in Zurich. His phone was up to more 100%. So Jeffrey Smart started writing about that. Actually, Smart goes in there. He's the guy who wrote the book Who, which I own the book but never read. But now that and I was trying to figure out where I bought this book, right? Because I got lots of these books. I saw this one book Who on my bookshelf. I was like, I don't think I've ever read that one. And I picked it up and I said, oh, that looks interesting. I put it back down. I was trying to find other books from Bookclub. I picked it up. It's like, I don't remember even how I got this book. And it wasn't until I reread here, I was like, oh, I bought Who because I read the Checklist Manifesto. Is how I got to this, right? So he actually, Jeffrey Smart talks about this, right? He basically comes up with the names. He gives names to all the investors. I love the names. I thought this was actually pretty clever, right? So I'm actually, now I want to go back and read Jeffrey Smart's book because it sounds like he's a pretty funny guy. So he calls some investors the art critics, right? And so there's the ones that just kind of look at it and just based on intuitiveness and based on their long experience, they basically say, yeah, I'm going to invest in that or I'm not going to invest in that, right? It's kind of like, I like art or I don't like art. And they have the sponges. Those are the guys that will suck everything up. But they were doing due diligence by mucking around, right? And it's interesting, too. This is actually the same way that a lot of people interview. If you ever read the book, oh, maybe that's how I got it. Who? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So now it's all coming back to me. He uses the same type of strategy for people interviewing people, right? So there's when people interview people for a job, you have some people that are like the art critic. They just go in there and they just have a gut feel. I know within 10 seconds of meeting somebody whether I'm going to hire or not. And then you have the ones that are the sponges that will ask every question under the sun with no strategy about it whatsoever. Then you have the terminators, right? And this is the stump the chump type of interview guys, right? That will just try to do trick questions like, why is a manhole cover round? Right? Couldn't answer that, so we're not going to hire him. Right. And then he calls us smart, and this is cool. He called the smart, that the investors that he called the good ones, right? The ones that figured out the airline captains. And why did he call them the airline captains?
Methodical, checklist-driven approach.
Yep. And what were the airline captains? How were they? And it's actually on page 172. What were the results they got compared to the art critics, the sponges, and the terminators?
80% return on investment compared to 35% or less for the others.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty impressive.
They also had a 10% likelihood of later having to fire a senior manager as opposed to a 50% likelihood for the others.
Yeah. So a VC who follows a non-checklist driven approach, when they go in and invest in the company, it's a coin flips chance as if the management team gets fired. As opposed to one that's checklist driven, that goes out, does the due diligence, has a process, is disciplined about it, is only getting rid of 1 out of 10. So what happens to an organization when you come in and fire all the senior managers? What's the likelihood of that company being a success? Right? You're switching direction, everything's in turmoil, you lose good people, all momentum stops, and it's basically like a reboot. And not a graceful one either, right? That's a hit the power switch reboot, right?
It's more like an outage.
It's more like an outage.
A data center going
it's
down.
more like an outage. Yeah. And interestingly enough, how many of them were taking the airline captain approach? Proven statistically, this is a better approach to investment. Look, you invest in companies where they have a solid management team, they know what they're doing. It's got proven in terms of the return on your investment, median 80% return on investments compared to the 35%, doubling the investments. What venture capital wouldn't sign up for that? How many of them are doing the checklist-driven approach?
15%.
1 in 8. 1 in 8. All right.
16%.
And why is it? Why is
Oh,
it again? Because checklists aren't sexy. So one of the interesting things they talks about here is, and then he's got the story about, and this is actually, I really like the way that he kind of ended this book about the miracle on the Hudson. Right, and it's actually not the end of the book. He kind of preludes the chapter to this, and kind of even, the Captain Sullenberg or whatever his name is, was even trying to drive the point that, hey, it wasn't just me, it wasn't Luke Skywalker landing the X-wing and Dagobah, right? It was a process. It was a team approach, and the media was like, no, it was none of that. It was you, Sully. It wasn't for you. It wasn't going to happen. How many times had he flown with that co-pilot before? Never, right? But what were they able to do? Establish from the very beginning.
Process, they were able to establish their rapport and
Rapport, yep. And the rapport was driven based off of the fact of a common knowledge of a checklist that they, and a discipline they both shared. They both knew coming into it that, hey, this is the checklist, this is how we get together, this is how we do the pre-brief, this is how we bring the team together, this is our checklist for pre-flight, this is how we take off. And immediately he was walking in and being able to work together. And that way, two strangers, but a shared common background and shared common experience with a shared common discipline, were able to work together as a team after just meeting each other.
If I remember correctly, the co-pilot didn't have experience flying that type of airplane.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're correct. So one of the things they talked about after this story is about the three commonalities that all professional disciplines or professional organizations have together. Does anybody kind of remember what the, I'm trying to find those pages down over here. Yeah, all learned occupations. What are the three things that all those have common together? Anybody remember that?
What was the question?
So when you took a learned occupation instead of definition of professionalism, a code of conduct, they spell out ideas and duties. There are three common elements that exist in all of them. Whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, an IT professional. RJ, you think you remember them?
I think I remember that there was an expectation of selflessness,
Yes.
an expectation of skill,
Mhm.
and an expectation of trustworthiness.
Yes, exactly. Now, thinking about our business, right? What is our business? We are in, what do we do? We provide managed
Services.
services. What's the key word between managed and services? What is
Services.
services? And what's the root of the word services?
Serve.
Serve. To serve, right? So what are we in the business of doing?
Serving.
Serving, right? That's what do we call the machines that we put in the racks?
Servers.
Servers. What, are we in the IT business?
We're in the server business.
We're in
we serve.
service. We serve. We're in the service business, right?
We serve. Thanks for your service, RJ.
IT services.
IT services, right? So when you are of service to others, also, what type of leadership style do I try to constantly preach?
Servant.
Servant. See a theme here?
Did you say servant or did you say serpent?
Servant. Yes.
Servant.
Servant, right? So if you are going to be of service of others, by definition, you must then be selfless. All right? So if I was going to say, hey, the folks at Clear Data, regardless if we're IT or we're ProServe or we're finance, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to compare the work that we do here, the culture we're trying to build, the people we're looking to hire. I'm going to say, let's compare it to the three commonalities of professionals that require a code of conduct. Is working here at Clear Data, is selflessness a requirement?
Yes.
All right, check the box. All right, we got one there in terms of we need to be, that we can say this is a code of conduct that is required to be working in Clear Data. All right, what was the next one? Number two?
Skill.
Skill. All right.
Yeah, we'll take it.
Take it or leave it. Yes. Previous companies I worked at, we actually said, "Hey, we will hire. We will train. We'll train to hire. Right? We'll train to hire." Eric, how did our experiments go in the train to hire process go to dates? Did not go well, right? Yes. We came in here. We said, let's give somebody who seems scrappy, who seems eager to learn, let's give him a shot, and it worked. 90 days later, we're walking the guy out the door.
Sorry about
Yes. Right. We don't have a training team, right? We're a startup. One of the requirements for people to come in here, we talk about it all the time, you have to pull your own weight. Matter of fact, you have to pull more than your own weight. There's more weight than there is people. So you have to pull more than your own weight. It's technically impossible to pull more than your own weight unless you have leverage. And the only way you get leverage is by having a team. Because then you have someone to pull with you and help leverage against that. So if you're going to come in here and pull more than your own weight, what are the things that you need to have? You need to have skill. You need to know what you're doing. We'll teach you about the customers. We'll teach you about the idiosyncrasies of our network and our cloud. But if you don't know things like VMware, if you don't know things about how to do proper accounting, if you don't know how to do web development, if you don't have management skills, previously management team, and you just show up here with not knowing anything, it's not going to work, right? We've had some people come and go. As a matter of fact, when Matt and I got here, somebody left like 2 days into our tenure here at Clear Data because it was apparent that they didn't have the skills. So, would anybody disagree with the fact that to work here at Clear Data, you have to be selflessness and you have to have skill? All right, that's 2 out of 3. What's the third one?
Trustworthiness.
Okay. What's trustworthiness mean here at Clear Data today?
transparency.
Transparency.
It's really what we're driving through every level of our organization, is to be transparent internally and externally, ensure that things we're doing are in the best interests of their data and our customers. If we screw up, we own it.
Yeah. Talking to customers, right? We screw up. We had a call with the customer today that we made a mistake in terms of patching. We didn't try to hide, obfuscate. We basically, Chris Barley did a great job of detailing it completely out and sent it to him in a PDF, completely transparent. And what did that do for the customer? Purely trust us. No problem.
It's part of our vision too.
Part of our
I
vision.
mean, security, compliance,
Mhm.
ability to provide that in this industry, a high trust.
Yep.
I mean, it's part of the name of one of the certifications. So.
Yep. Yeah, so trustworthiness. And now also too, it comes both ways too. We trust everybody to do the right thing. We have a lot of access. We have a lot of access to be able to get their job done. We also trust that if you screw up, if you mess up, you come and you fess up to it, so no one has to hunt around and try to find it. And also with that trustworthiness comes the fact that if you mess up, if you screw up, if it was a mistake of ignorance, right, or just a mistake of even incompetence, as long as you own up to it and don't repeat it over and over again, and we learn from it, no one's getting fired for that. Right? We're not walking people out the door just because you make one mistake. Although you might get walked out the door if you try to cover it up and hide it, and figure out who it is. As a matter of fact, it's interesting. If you think about the scandals that have happened in the United States from a government perspective, is it the act or is it the cover-up that is more offending? Cover-up, right? Watergate. What was the whole Watergate fiasco about? What was Watergate actually about?
They broke into the Democratic offices in the Watergate building,
Yep.
tried to steal intel.
Yep. And then what was the entire investigation? What was the congressional investigation about? Was it
Whether
about
the president knew about it and covered it up.
covered up? Iran-Contra. What was the act?
Trading arms for hostages.
Supporting Contra, selling arms to Iran, then turn around and take that money and support the Contras.
Against Sandinistas.
Right, against the Sandinistas. Right? Was the congressional investigation with Oliver North and Jessica Hahn and all those folks, was the investigation about the act or the cover-up?
Cover-up.
The cover-up.
But Oliver North didn't know anything about it.
Yes. Right? Monica Lewinsky. Was it actually about the act or the cover-up?
Entertainment value was
Entertainment
about
value.
the act.
Yes. Right?
About your definition
Is. Right?
Oh, man.
Yeah. So, trustworthiness is all about always taking responsibility for your actions, good or bad. And I think at Clear Data, we have that type of mentality now. We have that type of part of our DNA. And it's also respecting the fact that people are going to trust you and give you the information that you turn around and use that against them. And fortunately, too, we have customers that are not using that type of information against us either, right? When we've been trustworthy and open to customers, when we've done good things or done bad things, they've never turned around and turned that against us. Why do people want to cover it up to begin with? Because they're afraid that it's going to be used against them. That's going to be hung over their head. So they try to cover it up and hide from it. In the actual practice, the opposite is always mostly the case. If it's not the case, okay, we live with the consequences. All right, so we got the three pieces of what is a professional role, and we think Clear Data. If you work in Clear Data, you must be professional, right? We've checked the three boxes. What's the fourth one, though, that airline pilots have that takes it to a different level?
I remember that one also.
Okay, RJ, what was that last one?
Discipline in following prudent procedure and in functioning with others.
Yes. So it's discipline, right? And what we say, what's the key part of being successful in terms of being a checklist-driven organization? Discipline. How do you think we're doing on a discipline standpoint here at Clear Data? If you're the rank, the four things we got going on here, right? In terms of selflessness, skill, trustworthiness, and discipline, where would you put discipline on 1, 2, 3, 4?
Still number 4.
Yeah.
It's getting better.
It's getting better.
We're making strides.
It's still number 4.
Solid number 4.
Solid number 4. Firmly planted number 4, right? Where do you think it ranks in terms of pilots? First thing, right? So what's the success? Why is it that pilots are able to fly thousands of flights around the world every single day with rarity of accidents? Is it the selflessness? Is it the skill? Is it the trustworthiness? Or is it the discipline? Discipline, right?
It's because we're built for novelty and excitement, not for careful attention to detail.
Yes.
I like that.
But discipline, but from an aviation standpoint, when you look at the aviation industry, discipline is the norm. That is their leading trait, right? When we go and build job profiles here at Clear Data, we have this long list of attributes. It's 178, 190 some odd attributes, right? They're all things like confidence, charisma, trustworthiness, responsibility. As I was building the other day, it's all alphabetical order, right? You can go through, you look at what one's over there. If you're going to build a job profile for a pilot, what's the first one you got to put at the top? It's got to be discipline. It's got to be discipline, right? So one of the things that we need to think about how to do better here at Clear Data is how do we drive more discipline? Because while we can talk about checklists and we can make checklists, the only way that checklists stick is if we actually have discipline around. What's so hard about adopting discipline?
We're not built for it.
Not built for it, right?
Novelty and excitement.
Yes.
Well, it goes back to my previous statement about believing that skill and experience somehow supersedes the need for that checklist, but the discipline that comes along with it.
Mm-hmm.
The same reason why the checklist that was relayed through the World Health Organization story that was shared in the book was a little bit slow in uptake. Is that the medical staff, with all of their training and experience, believed that it wasn't immediately necessary.
Yeah, my skill allows me not to have discipline, right? My mastery, my status as a master builder, right, or a doctor or an expert allows me not to have discipline. And it's not like that the airline industry, again, they started adopting this type of discipline, started like in the 1930s with that Boeing crash and the bomber that crashed at the demonstration. It's not like it's always been that way. They've transformed into a disciplined organization in less than 100 years. And it's even not always been that way as good in the last, say, 40 years. They talk about the story about these two Boeing 747s that basically collided at high speed in the Canary Islands. And to Eric's point, what was the failure? It was the captain who was and continued down the runway because he felt that he had a skill. He ignored his second officer saying, "Hey, look, I don't think they said what you think they said," and he basically said, "I'm the captain. I'm going to fly this plane." What ended up happening? He crashed 2 737s together. So they've had the hard lessons, right? They've moved away from the checklist. They've had the hard lessons, and they realize you got to come back to the discipline checklist. So talking to RJ about the giving blood, right? Signing up for giving blood, and we talked about that checklist, right? And talked about, hey, that checklist is really long. It's really arduous. It goes on forever. You get the same questions asked. You have to self-fill it out. Someone else asks you, and you get to fill it out again. Seems like it's ridiculous. And I said, yeah, you're probably right. There's a lot of things in there that don't need to be asked. However, can you argue with the results? And your answer was hard to argue with the results. And again, it comes to the idea, you'll do that checklist 50 times, 49 times out of the times you do it, perfectly fine. But you do that checklist not for the 49 times to do it right. You do that checklist for the one time that you're going to get it wrong. Which takes us to the end of his book, The Save. What's the story about the save? So as you go to chapter 9, what did you talk about the save? What's the interesting story he tells there? This guy that he's operating on and removing a tumor, taking out.
Yeah. Mr. Hagerman?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he talked about the fact that as he gathered this information, there were some instances where he thought the checklist may have contributed to a save, but Hagerman was the instance where he knows it did.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about the fact that he nicked the vena cava, and basically blood was just pouring into the guy's body cavity. And because the nurse followed the checklist, they had enough blood on hand to actually transfuse and keep him alive. If they hadn't followed the checklist, he would have bled out and been gone.
Yeah. And so the checklist basically saved this guy's life, not because they did everything the right way, it's because one mistake happened and they're prepared for the unexpected.
And he had even stated before as they were walking through procedures, he stated that he didn't think there was a big risk that there would be any blood loss. But the nurse decided to check to see if the blood was on hand, and it wasn't. So she had 4 pints brought up and put into reserve specifically for it.
And had they not had that there, that guy would have been dead.
He would have been dead. There's no way they could have gotten the blood there fast enough to keep him from bleeding out.
Cool. Very good. So, and he basically says, can I share this story? And, it's kind of cool way to end the story about how the author of this book makes this huge mistake, almost kills a guy.
Well, he lost sight in his eye. He was the CEO of a company, and lost sight in his eye. His recovery was a long, arduous process. It wasn't like they just put blood in him the next day he was up and around. It took him months and months and several other surgeries to overcome it.
Yep. So, one of the things we're going to think about, what do we got going on over here in our ghetto club? What's the whole purpose of that thing? What are we going to be doing? Why do we have that over there?
It's consuming power.
Consuming power, making it loud and hard to have meetings back here, right?
As it gets colder outside, it'll keep you hot.
Yes. makes for a very expensive, loud, very inefficient heater.
Working through our due diligence in ensuring that we're selecting the right products.
Yes.
Not only that, but Zach used it just today to basically do a test on an RFC that was submitted by Aaron Johnson to see what would happen when he trunked VLANs across switches.
Right. So when we're done with this thing, what's going to happen? What are we going to have when this whole thing's over and done with?
We're going to have a completed checklist.
No, we're going to have a completely brand new cloud. Right? It's going to have a completely brand new cloud.
We played that. We did that well. That was perfect.
Yes. We're going to have a new checklist here, right? We're going to have a completely brand new cloud that may or may not be on VMware, that may or may not be on HP hardware, that is not going to be in Cyrus.
It's definitely not going to be over there.
It's definitely not going to be over there. It's not going to be with the current network equipment that we run today. It's not going to be supported by Palo Alto firewalls. But the people here that are used to all of that are going to be responsible for operating that cloud in the same professional manner that we've been operating it today. So the question that I have to you guys is the new cloud that we're going to build, that we're going to put all of our new customers on, big ones too, not small, mom and pop, 3-4 doctor practices. We're going to be putting on large hospitals, large ISVs, big data platforms, Hadoop clusters, SAP HANA, Cassandra. These type of things are going to be running on the new cloud. 24/7, 100% uptime, mission critical, life critical. BAA protected from a PHI standpoint on on a cloud that you guys don't even know what it's going to be or how it's going to be put together. This is basically our version of a Boeing airplane that was a bomber in 1930. My question is when you guys get in to fly it, is it going to fly or is it going to crash? And what are you guys going to do to make sure that it does not crash? And there's a parallel of this book.
Nice.
Right. And with that also, you got to develop the discipline and have the DNA. So when we think about those four things that make professional organization, where does discipline need to be? Where does it need to be?
Top.
Number one. We got 3 months to figure it out before that new cloud's in production. And then looking to you guys to make all those things happen.
Big mountain climb just like that.
Exactly. All right. Any other thoughts about the book before we wrap it up? I show you guys a couple of videos, and then we pick the next book. You guys say the book.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
What'd you say?
I was thinking very honestly about the question, do I have any thoughts on that? And you've already spoken the answer to that a week ago or a couple of weeks ago. We here at the book club are doing the most proactive work to embrace these concepts. And what does it take to roll it out company-wide?
Yes, we are.
Company-wide. And you mentioned before that it is from the top down that happens. So.
Yeah, well, I think from this case, this is one of those things that's got to be grassroots, right? I can talk about discipline all day long,
but
you guys got to decide.
Establishing that culture.
Yes.
Well, I think
that's what you're here to facilitate.
Yeah.
There's probably a nice symbiosis between the two, because if you look at the example of the changes they made for inline infections back at the beginning of the book, it was the grassroots level that identified the need and really made it happen, but they couldn't make it happen without the support of that purchasing and buying agent, without the support of the executive team who empowered them to, and basically changed even the vendor's delivery system to make sure that it was all bundled together. So it was a team effort, there's no doubt about it. It was a culture that was built from both sides of the coin, not just top down or bottom up driven. It was an entire effort.
Cool.
There's the other example in the book to that same point around the Katrina incident and how Walmart kind of mobilized, and that was really from a bottom level approach. That Walmart had the understanding that if they made decisions at the top, it take too long to propagate down through the channels to really have the effect that they expected it would. Now, anybody that knows me will tell you that I'm not a big fan of Walmart as a company, but reading that, it did change my perspective on it a little bit, because it's a very valuable story that's really ingrained in all of our government, most large organizations, is that things move very, very slowly because nobody at the appropriate levels, where the tactical levels will say, have the ability to make decisions and kind of drive the direction of the organization when it needs to be done quickly, right? Strategic, those are planned out long-term initiatives, but when management and the folks who report up to them have no ability to make those decisions, then it really hamstrings an organization and slows down the pace at which you can drive things. So,
the idea.
Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. I mean, it really depends on the scenario at hand. Katrina was a good example, right? That was not the time for the U.S. government to make a decision that took 3 days, right? It was act now, right? These people are literally drowning and need help.
Yep. Yeah, that idea of pushing the power out to the edge. We talked about who's the best people to make checklists. It's the people closest to the problem, the subject matter experts, not the centralized control. But if we're going to push the power out to the edge, and we're going to have you guys in charge of checklisting, creation of checklists, the one key piece that we need to have is the discipline part.
Yep.
Right. And we talked about ITIL discipline. We talked about customer service discipline. I even talked about an NPS. When I talk about an NPS, Net Promoter Score, I talk about it as not a net promoter program. I call it a net promoter discipline. So this concept of discipline is a recurring theme that you have seen through all the books that we have today. 3 steps to delivering great service. The 5 steps of handling a customer complaint. To be able to follow those 3 and 5 steps requires a discipline to do so.
I was just going to bring that up because I've had several ticket reviews now for our first inaugural step in the process. And it was interesting just the feedback from the team members who have gone through this. You know, they've all said, this is good. We're building a culture. We're building discipline. You know, it's not always easy. You don't always see the value in some of the steps. But that's where discipline comes in. You know, it's not necessarily novel or exciting, but it's that disciplined approach that makes a difference with our customer base.
Yeah, and there's value in each of the steps. But when you start doing it over and over again, you say, well, maybe I can shortcut this step. It's not important. It's maybe not the most important thing in the process. When we start shortcutting the steps,
That's right.
That's when the planes start to crash. And you got to believe in the checklist. And actually, we talked about Sully Sullenberg when he talked about flying the plane and landing the plane. It wasn't the skill that he gave credit to. He basically said it. I can't remember what the quote. I'll have to look at the quote. Specifically, what did he say? It was really good, whatever it was. Something. Yeah. I want to correct the effort. I want to correct the record right now. This was a proved effort. The outcome, he said, was a result of teamwork and adherence to process as much as any individual skill he may have had. Right? Adherence to process. That's what he gave the credit to for saving 155 lives and landing a plane with no engines into the Hudson River. Adherence to process.
He also didn't think that flying gliders at the Air Force Academy really equated to his effort to land that plane in the Hudson.
That's true. Well, there's definitely less passengers on the glider than there was. Cool. All right.